Hello, this is Silas. I'm back with my friend Stephen for a conversation series, continuing in the multiple conversation series that we're having. This is going to be an entry in the one on cracks in the Ivory Tower, the moral mess of higher education. And I'll just kick it to Stephen to tell you a bit about this and also say hello to you guys out there, guys, gals, and everything else in between. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. So we're resuming our conversation on Cracks in the Ivory Tower, the moral mess of higher education. This book largely deals with the ethical concerns in the university system. So this isn't in regards to the ideology being taught. It's more in regards to things like funding, incentives as far as teachers, where the money goes, how it's used, issues with grading, students not retaining what they learn, et cetera, et cetera. Each chapter breaks these topics down pretty nicely. So we're doing this chapter by chapter.
Yeah. So with this, we're going to be focusing, as you said, on higher university. So it's a higher university, higher education. Yeah, these things, higher university, big schooling, industrial schooling. It's kind of different terms to these things, but it's focusing mostly on the 9,500 or so degree granting and postgraduate degree granting institutions in the United States of America. But part of why I think this is important is not just because the rest of the world still looks at the United States of America as one of the superpowers and one of the countries that leads in a lot of facets of just human flourishing. And they think we want that. We want to be like that. So they look at. Hey, so I have a bit of a issue here with the internet. Had to slow down. I was talking about how countries look at America and look at the positive things about it, and even within America and other countries in the world, they talk about, think about the kids, think about the education, they're the future. So there's certain aspects of the results that they think and attribute to the educational system in the United States of America that is leading them to adopt certain other parts of it that I don't consider America. So this whole idea of just looking there is not positive. America, and that's not a system I would want a lot of other countries to adopt because that's the student debt that goes into that. So that's just one of the examples. Another reason I think this is an important thing to talk about right now is we're going through a pandemic in the world right now, and that's given people a lot of pause on the current systems that I think were going on just off of momentum. And now we've been given a chance to actually stop and look at the systems and say, okay, now that we're restarting some of these things, or now that this thing has ended, should we think of adopting this possibly better way to do something? Should we actually adjust something in this? Maybe there was a facet about this that you thought, okay, it was 80% positive, but that 20% is just part of the momentum in it. But now that everything is paused, is there a way to restart that 80% and prune down that 20%? So those are the things that I think by actually knowing the content, problems occur not because of what X is, but because of how we define X. I don't think the people involved in the system are against children and other people being educated. I'm not, Stephen isn't, but we think if we do support this, if we do support education, then how are we defining the best ways to educate people? So those are the kind of things that we're talking about here. Any thoughts on that?
And one thing I keep saying with this book, and I think what we're trying to do is, I keep saying this book, I don't think that it gives all the answers, but it does ask a lot of the right questions. Like it gets people to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe this isn't as reliable as we thought. Hey, maybe there is waste here, all that. And again, it's like, it's what certain good philosophers do. I think, like, I remember Michael Malice said that about Ayn Rand. Like, he's like, she doesn't give you all the answers, but she does ask a lot of the right questions. You said that about Wilfred Riley too. And I think that's key because there may be things we're missing, but someone may hear that and think, hey, wait a minute, why don't we do this instead? And then we've just come up with a solution. So I think it's important to at least ask those questions, even if we don't have a perfect solution waiting in the wings.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to read you the chapter list right now, and we're going to be reading chapter 5, this one, going over chapter 5 in the analysis of this conversation today. But we've recorded 4 already, 5 actually counting the one with 7 big economic insights, normative business ethic questions, and descriptive business ethics questions. I think I would suggest that if you haven't seen any of the rest, at least watch that one either before or after this, as it informs kind of the focus that we have on this, and definitely the focus that the authors took on analyzing this content. Mm-hmm. And these are questions that apply to the book, but I think apply with the rest of life as well. I think they kind of go along with Thomas Sowell 3 questions for people on the political left to talk to them about certain questions. But these are more The way they're worded are actually specifically towards the school, so you can see it that way. But then there's many ways to actually take them out and apply them to other parts of life,
Yeah.
especially the normative business ethics questions and descriptive business ethics questions. Those ones are very general. Yet the wording in those 7 big economic insights have the school kind of take on them as they're from this book.
Sure.
Yeah. So here are the chapters. Number 1, neither gremlins nor poltergeists. Number 2, what do academics really want? Number 3, why most academic advertising is immoral bullshit. Number 4, on reading entrails and student evaluations. Number 5, grades, communication breakdown. Number 6, when moral language is a cover for self-interest. Number 7, the general education hustle. Number 8, why universities produce too many PhDs. Number 9, cheaters everywhere. Number 10, 3 big myths about what's plaguing higher education. And number 11, answering the taxpayers. And then after that, we will do just one kind of just giving our thoughts and introducing the next talk that we're going to have. We're just giving a kickoff to that. We're going to already tell you it's going to be something to do with human action in different ways. We're still talking about exactly how we'll do that one. And that's Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. But for now, let's get into this one. So chapter 5, grades, communication breakdown.
Sure. So the last chapter focused on student evaluations of teachers. This chapter will focus on the grading of students and the issues with calculating GPA, grade point average. So the methodology of grading students is better than professor evaluations, but it still has its share of problems, which we're going to get into. So our authors argue that it ultimately fails at grading fails at what it's intended to do. I think they make the case very well. So let's start off here by talking about individual grades on individual.
GPA, sorry. You need to expand on that. That's grade point average for those of you not in the American school system. So, yeah.
So it's the average. It's all your grades for each class added together. Then they divide that to get by the number to get the average. So that it's usually it's on a scale of 4. So of course 4.0 is top, and then if you have a 3.0, that's pretty good, and of course below is
bad. Yeah. I think it was 4.0 is equivalent of an A, so that's 100%. Then 3.5 I think was B average. Then of course 3 is a C average, and that goes that's 100%, 90%, 80%. Then so C, then D was 2.5.
Yeah.
E was 2.0, and then below that was considered failing, but I don't know what's currently happening with current core. Is it not Common Core? I don't know if that's changed. This is from K through 12. I think this also applies in higher education, but in higher education, it's harder to just fail in that sense. So they don't hold you back. You just keep taking the course until you pass the course if you need it for your actual degree. So that's the system that happens in American schools. For those of you who are not familiar with the American schooling system and grading system,
that happened at culinary school too, where because it was the block system, which I mentioned in previous video. So it's basically, if you fail a course, you have to pay another $1,500 or whatever it was, and spend another 3 weeks taking that course. So the thing is, you could conceivably keep failing and just keep taking the courses and spend twice as much time in school. I mean, it would cost you a fortune at some point. Most of those people just quit because they realize it's not worth paying over and over to just keep retaking things. But you could conceivably if you want to do.
Yeah, and it's a tough thing. And how do you actually decide when it's a student failure versus the teacher failure? But I think we went over that in the previous chapter.
Well, the thing, I didn't hear of many people being kicked out of culinary school either. There was someone who got caught dealing drugs. They got kicked out, but of course they went to jail as well. But aside from that. But I mean, aside from that, it's unless you do something really dramatic, unless you have you do something violent or you're deemed a threat or something, it's usually they just let you take the classes over and over.
Yeah. So that's I just wanted to expand on that, and I thought GPA is kind of similar to what's the GDP, gross domestic product, where they just kind of throw that number out and. Okay, do you even know what that means? What is it measuring? Is it apples to apples? Is it oranges to orange? Can you really compare GDP of a place like the United States of America versus the GDP of New Zealand? What's the actual thing? So now if you're comparing the GPA of Harvard versus Keene State. Was that Keene State
Yeah,
University?
Kansas State, yeah.
Brought up. So what is the real actual comparison or importance of doing that? But yeah, sorry for
Sure.
breaking. They might actually go into that later on.
They are, yeah. We'll get into that. So they start off with an example of individual grades on individual assignments. So they talk about a hypothetical Professor Smith, a common name, about his criteria for grading philosophy papers. Now, this gets a little complicated because obviously if it's like multiple choice with objective answers, we know. So if someone were to say, if it's what is 2 + 2 equal, and someone says selects 8, we know that's wrong. But then with things like philosophy, it gets a little tougher because you have to factor in, is it well argued? But then it also gets into the biases of the professor. Like Molyneux talked about that, like when he had a Marxist professor and he wrote all these arguments for capitalism that were well cited. And I guess he got a decent grade, but he had to work really hard. Whereas other people have said, oh, I just tell the professor what they want to hear and they give me a good grade. So you have to factor in those personal biases and prejudices. And then they talk about how the hypothetical student Sally wonders what will influence her grade, because again, it could get into how easy or tough is that professor. Apparently, they've done a study showing that grades after breakfast tend to be higher than those before lunch, and they wonder if if it's like the teachers are sort of just ate and are sort of waking up, so they're a little more lax, and then as the day passes, they start noticing more errors. So, of course, again, if the professor and she had the same views, he might give her a higher grade there. Again, personal preference, like I talked about, I had chefs who I knew liked me, so it's like, you could argue I had an unfair advantage in that respect, so there's that issue as well. And the question is whether or not this is a reliable measure. Again, remember the definition from the last chapter. It's, does it measure the same thing consistently in all circumstances? Not clear that it does. So Jeffrey Shinska and Kimberly Tanner, 2 educational psychologists, talked about biases and influence it and inconsistencies that influence grading. They wrote about some of those factors we just mentioned. The educational psychologist W.C. Eel studied the consistency of teachers' grading by asking 61 teachers to grade the same history and geography papers twice. The second time was 11 weeks after the first. He concluded that, quote, variability of grading is about as great as in the same individual as in groups of different individuals. So after analysis of reliability coefficients, arguments of scores amounted to little better than sheer guesses. Factors that occasionally influence the grade can be the penmanship of the author, the sex of the author, ethnicity of the author, level of experience of the instructor, order in which papers are reviewed, and even the attractiveness of the author. I think I mentioned in a previous discussion about that thing at CIA about everyone turning up the same soup. The good-looking girls in class got higher grades on it, but it was all from the same pot, so it was the same soup. So things like that. So this is happening here as well. And we can, of course, in terms of broad strokes, we can say, okay, we know A papers are better than B papers, but then it's a question of how much and why. So you have some thoughts and ideas on that?
Yeah. The first one with suspect that a lot of the people who are most educated people, the most highly schooled people, come out and think that the world is organized and based on unfair systems of comparison, saying, oh, it's unfair to treat me in this way and not take account of me as an individual and my background. And they've been in K through 12, they've been in at least 4 years of undergraduate or sometimes even the postgrad. So it's not too surprising that some people will go through this system that we see is in many cases biased and unfair and project that onto the world because their lived experience might possibly seeing the subconscious bias and unfairness that does exist in these institutions of higher learning. So that's kind of informed how they look at the rest of the world. Whereas there could be some people who don't go that route, who just go to a trade school and it's like, hey, can you actually do the thing? Like at the end of the day, the person who's rating you is like, does that engine of that car work? Did you complete the fix in that engine in that car under the 30 minutes? Like I can look at your engine, look at this other person's engine, look at that other person's engine. They're all the same. So everybody passes. So for those people, they go from a lived experience where they're like, no, it doesn't matter how we came to do it. It doesn't matter what language I was using, the methods I used to actually fix it, what my skin color is, what my background is. At the end of the day, did I fix the engine? So they might be informed of something where they don't understand that these other people have been in a system where there's so much subjectivity into their grading, into their worth, into their system of worth. And that is a thing that's actually put there. Oh, I have a GPA. Oh, I'm valedictorian. Oh, I'm this and that. oh, I graduated cum laude, or that's a thing. Something cum
Magna
laude.
cum laude.
Magna cum laude. That's a thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so they have that kind of thing. The people with the degrees on their walls and things like this. It's something to signify status, and we are social animals, and we seek status. So, for some groups of people, they might tie status to something that is very subjective, which is happening in your institutions of higher learning, versus if you go to trade schools, if you go out there and just get into the market, it is more based off of objective merit. So people might have a different idea of what actually the world judges. Is that something you think might be informing some of these people?
I think so. Well, I was going to get into for a sec to sort of an anecdote, but it applies is that the bias thing goes both ways. Because I remember, for example, my sister turned in this essay and she got a bad grade on it. And my mother said, like, oh, it was a really good essay. I don't know why, but that's tough because either way there could be a bias. It could have been a well done essay, but the teacher may not have liked something she talked about. But then the other thing is, well, people are going to be more favorable towards their kids, like the parents who always say my kids are good looking when you know that's not the case. So the bias can skew either way. That's why it's a little tough to sit here and say, oh yes, this is objectively good, because again, it's like like I think Tom Woods was talking about some dissertations even that like have actually been pretty weak, but if they conform to certain views, they get the top mark right away. Whereas other things, if you write something that's dissenting, you have to really go above and beyond because you have to work harder to make your case. So yes. I think that plays into it as well. But then, like in Gad Saad's book, he talked about biases in academia. He talks about a number of professors said they would punish people who had dissenting views. Like they were asked and they said openly, yeah, we would. So you have to factor that in as well. It's like they talk about pre-civil rights era. Oh, this person's black. They commit a crime. They're going to be guilty no matter what. White jury, all that. It's not, obviously it's not that extreme, but it's a similar idea of, okay, the bias is against them immediately. Oh.
Yes, and we have prejudices. I have biases. I have prejudices on certain things. I try to identify them and account for them. Some of them I think are for good reasons. Some might be for worse reasons. Of course, if some are for good, then that means others by definition are for worse. But I'm not going to claim that I'm against them. I have actually a mistrust. I was just watching something Viva Frey and like Robert Barnes. They do this vlog thing where they just talk about different things. And Robert Barnes is a lawyer. He's a very successful lawyer, and he was talking about when he's going through and picking juries, he's actually a lot more suspicious, or actually won't accept in some cases a juror that comes in and says, "I have no bias." He prefers the one to come in and say, "Okay, I'm biased towards this, but in this case, I haven't gotten this information." And then he can be like, "Okay, now that I know what to look for with this person, I can see if they apply," because the people who are saying they have no bias are just kind of pretending. That's why I don't even go as far as be like, oh, I don't see race. No, I have eyes. I can see skin colors. I can see variations. I see those. Like, I'm not blind to height. I'm not blind to weight. I'm not deaf to accents. There's many things. If I'm walking around in an area where I've gone to other countries where I don't speak the language, and I hear somebody speak English, I'll hear that, and that will give me some kind of tinge of like, oh, that's somebody who I can communicate with in a better way. Like, that's there. To pretend that doesn't exist is BS. But then if I hear the person with English is running at me with a knife, and then everybody else who's speaking a different language is like is saying, come, we'll protect you. I'm not like, well, that guy has a knife and he speaks English, so I'm going to go to that guy. When it gets to that point, I don't have the bias in that kind of sense. Okay.
Well, and I think I'm sorry, you had one more point?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to sort of comment on that. I've sort of changed on that too, because I used to have that attitude of like, I try to be objective. I try not to be biased. But look, we're all biased. I mean, there are certain people I'm favorable towards. There are certain people that if they get criticized, I'm going to be more defensive of them. I admit that. Now, if the criticisms are valid, if they can be proved, I try and take that into consideration. I always say, like, any of the people I like, I don't worship any of these people. You can criticize them. My problem is if I find out the criticisms are false or based on misrepresentations or something like that. Like, I was reading Phil Magness's critique of Nancy McLean's books, and some of the stuff she said about certain people, how there were leaps of logic. She made connections that weren't there. She even cites certain sources but claimed the opposite of what the sources said. Things like that. That's where I just become really disgusted, because you're deliberately lying to push a certain agenda. Again, you can criticize any of these people, but if it's not based on factual information, that's where I take issue.
Yeah, and that's one of my one of the things I'm worried about when you look at this kind of industrial schooling type of environment, where it's very selfish for you to expect anybody else to care as much about your children as you do about them.
Yeah.
And let alone to have people be forced to care about them. So if you have a teacher, even if that teacher is well-meaning, let's say that teacher has a kid and that teacher is told like, okay, you have to teach these children this information. And that teacher understands that that's their job. That's putting money on the plates of the kids. Even if that teacher disagrees with that information, some of the information they're being told to teach their children, and it's their main source of income, and they will care more about their children. So they might just find a way to just rationalize and say, okay, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to teach the kids this because it's still a situation where my kids need to have food on their table. Like, I'm just going to pass these kids. I'm not going to be that critical about the things they're doing and things like that, because if I get a lower kind of, if they have a lower GPA, if I don't have a high enough pass-fail ratio, I'll lose my job and then I'll get in a bad situation. So I'm not really going to report on these kids. I'm not really going to be that concerned. Let's just get them through the system, because they're doing that because they're mostly concerned about their kid at home. That's the kind of thing where I'm saying there could be some negative things that just occur due to the way the system is set up that could be affected and actually dealt with, versus even the best meaning people will actually be in that situation. Whereas if you find a situation where there's more individualized teaching, where the parents are as much responsible or have more control and involvement in their kids' actual learning, that's one way to control for the biases as much as possible, where it's like, okay, you're looking after your kid, you'll probably look out for your kid's best, for your kid's best kind of, best interests over other things. And I'm also saying, with the parents out there, I understand that 99% of parents, of people, I would say, are doing this because they've rationalized somewhere in their mind that this is for the greater good of the children. Maybe not 99. There's some really crappy people out there who have just gotten kids as like as accessories and or they just go through the motions, they don't put too much thought into it. But yeah, it's majority of the people. So yeah.
But I would also add too, with the parents directly, it's they know their own kids. So like, for example, my parents would get on me. Oh, you know, if they would know, okay, you're capable of getting better grades, you can push yourself harder. The parents would be in the better position to make that call. Whereas to teachers, it's just, this is one out of how many kids, unless you get to know that kid really well. Now, I went to a very small school, so it was a little easier to do that because everyone kind of knows everybody. But like one of our neighboring schools, the graduating class is like 1,000 kids now. It's like, are any of the teachers going to know the kids that well, unless that kid was like a star student or such a bad kid they stood out? It's like a lot of these kids are just going to get lost in the mix.
Yeah, and if kids are so valuable, why are people so gung-ho for a system that takes that very valuable child away from their parents? Like, shouldn't people be like, oh, this kid is so valuable, they should spend as much time with their parents? It's something, cognitive dissonance that goes on in people's minds.
Sure.
I have one more point also with the history papers thing you mentioned with the different grading thing. Did they say, first of all, was it literally the same test, like you said, the same pot for the same pot of soup? And that thing that you mentioned in the culinary school, this was literally the same paper, like word for word. They were given it like in a couple of months. It was said,
it was the same thing, same people, same thing, but weeks apart, and they saw a variation in that. So they were showing that there's
how did they do that? Was it higher or lower? Did the second time did they rate it higher, or did it just fluctuate all over the place?
I'd have to check. I didn't write anything in my notes. I don't think in the book they specified. I mean, I think they cite the study. If you want to look it up, I can provide a link or something. But there was a lot of variation, and again, that's where you wonder, because it's like, did they just say, whatever, I'm tired of this, easy grade, or was it, oh, I noticed something I didn't the first time, take points? So it's a little hard to say.
That's really weird, because it's literally the same thing. And in that situation, it's different. I understand when you're tying it into the person of the looks. We are people, we're visual animals, so we do have this innate attraction to things that are attractive. By definition, we are attracted to the attractive. And so with that one, I can get that. But then if it's just literally just the same paper, and how do they not? I guess, but even controlling, even them knowing, I'm sure they probably were told somehow that.
Here, discussing about the issues that the teachers themselves who are grading might be dealing with in their life that might be able to affect how they see the actual content of the paper when they are grading it over these different times.
They had the first test, and then something with that paper has something topical about good relationships, and that makes them have a more negative look on it on that second time. There's so many things to factor into this. Look at right now what's happening with this pandemic is a lot of teachers are saying they're going through anxiety. So you as a parent might not be going through that much anxiety, but then now you're putting your child in care of an adult who's going through their own multiple myriads of anxieties due to this pandemic that the world is going to, and what are they projecting onto your child? So there's so much going on with that.
Well, I think of that Thomas Sowell quote where he says about how can they expect people to be equal to each other? The same man isn't equal to himself on every day, and and it's true. I mean, I remember like in kitchens, like I had some days where I was really motivated, really focused. Other days didn't sleep as well or distracted by something. It's like that's a factor to weigh as well. So
yeah. So, but with this book, with some of these things that you bring up, it's a well-sourced book. So I'm sure they, as you mentioned, they will say where the sources are. So whatever we're talking about in here as well, feel free to pick up the book suggested, or you can. There's probably ways you can find a lot of this content. With something like this, I'm sure you can probably just type in.
You can Google the studies, the studies and things. I'm sure they'd come up. Yeah.
All right. So yeah.
So the next section, it's calculating final grades within one class. This gets worse when the student's final grade for the semester is calculated. So remember from the last section, the student evaluations go from 1 to 5 or 1 to 7. But those numbers are stand-ins for certain verbal descriptions like effective, ineffective, somewhat effective, above, like very effective, extremely effective. But again, it's not clear what differentiates each one. I mean, obviously 1 and 5, we could tell, okay, horrible versus great. But when you get to like 2 versus 3, 3 versus 4, it becomes a little murkier. So we can't interpret those gaps between them. A similar problem has been found with grading. Grades don't measure constant units, especially with the issues I just talked about. It also depends on what the professor means by the grade. We'll get in the next section, we're going to get into how the grades essentially speak 9 different languages. That is, they measure for all these different things. So that becomes an issue. And again, on a multiple choice thing or something, we know the objective facts, it's easy. So it's like how many atoms are in water? 2. That's why it's H2O. So something like that we know is true. But then some of the things like philosophy and English, it gets tough because it gets into what does the professor want? What do they agree with? How much do they like the student? How easy are they? How tough are they? All that. So again, that gets a little harder. So we know again what the letter grades are supposed to symbolize, but it's not always clear how much they measure, what they measure, how much and why. And then especially when you add the pluses and minuses, like an essay might be great, but it might get an A minus, and you wonder, well, what would have kept it from an A plus and things like that. So a final grade, of course, is calculated based on grades, meaning whatever was there, of course, gets sort of averaged together, and this gets distorted. So one issue here could be, for example, the student Sally gets a B average, but then you find out she writes some A papers and a few C papers, but that's going to be different from someone who just writes B papers all the time, because if she wrote a few A papers, she has more potential and she might have had bad days or didn't understand the assignment or something, versus B, it's someone who, maybe tries hard but isn't fully getting it or something, depending. And at the margins, they also say students maybe get pushed up or down a little bit, depending. They may get rounded up or down. So, of course, that's an issue as well. Like I remember in culinary school, there were some students who got failed by half a point. And you really wonder, like, it was like half a point. Like, what would have had to go differently to get that half a point? And this is why, of course, the authors are saying, I think ideally it would be good to have more meaningful verbal qualitative descriptions rather than just units, because again, the units, they're supposed to be symbolic, but they may not always symbolize the same thing. Like we know 2, we know if you write out a 2, we know what that looks like. We know what a 3 looks like, all that. But then the question is, for grading, some of what that may measure may be incomplete or incoherent. Any comments or thoughts?
Yeah, it's a tough thing, and it's a question to the people out there who've been through systems of schooling. How much of the actual grading system were you aware of before? Did they tell you this is exactly what we're grading you on? I know from my experience with graphic design when I was an undergrad, when I was actually teaching myself, when I was not teaching others, when I was a lecturer myself, I actually borrowed some of the material and actually asked my college teachers, my college professors, can you give me, I guess, send me some examples of the things that you did? Because I used that because it broke down and said, okay, it's 20 points for this, it's 40 points for this, it's 60 points for this. And if you do this and this, that kind of breakdown where it indicates why this is being done for that. And I thought that was a positive thing. But I imagine there's a lot of people who just go through these systems and they don't really understand what exactly the rules and the laws are actually in there. And again, this might be another thing why people project this to the rest of the world and just think some of these things are arbitrary. We want to know what the rules are. We think you're changing the rules. You're not actually telling us what we're supposed to be doing here. We need to have a conversation about these things. Because I think in the system that they've been taught in, schooled in, indoctrinated into, that wasn't afforded to them. So
no,
this is just my question to them out there, or anybody who's been through a system, how much time was spent to ensure that you understood what was actually being graded? And I think it's a lot lower than I think should be. I think this is something that can be definitely done ahead of time.
Yeah.
And one more thing, though, is a small thing where you said the water H2O. It's 3 because it's H2. Then two elements, but 3 atoms.
No. I meant 2 atoms of hydrogen.
Okay,
that's what I was saying. How many atoms of hydrogen it would be 2? So
okay,
like something.
I might have misheard then.
But something like that. My point was that's objectively true. But then it's like, is this essay well argued? Again, that's when we get into murkier territory because of biases and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. So the next section, it's comparing and averaging grades across classes. So again, for a single student, it's not as clear how much the average of all their work is meaningful, because especially when we factor in that the professors will vary from class to class. So, for example, one of the things they talk about is how an A in one class might not be an A in another. Like, for example, there's some professors, and I saw this at culinary school too, who give out easy A's, but then there are other professors who won't because they see it as nobody's perfect, so you always have somewhere to improve upon. So some teachers I know, like, they say, oh yeah, they gave most of the class A's. Other teachers, it's like they might give one person an A maybe. So that becomes a little unclear as well. Some courses actually have mandatory grading curves, like you've probably heard about grading on a bell curve, like Georgetown's McDonough Business School. So they're meant to, but the curves are more meant to measure the quality of rankings rather than absolute measures. So again, this gets into issues because different classes have different averages. For example, certain finance and accounting classes have 3.0 average, but most have a 3.33 average. Electives outside of finance and accounting typically have a 3.5 average. So again, that might be with how rigorous is the work, how tough are the professors, all that. Of course, this is more number-based, so you have to be better at math, so it's probably more challenging, that'd be my guess, whereas certain electives would be a bit easier. A grade for an individual class may be even more meaningful, but then it's like, if you combine different classes together, it gets tough. Like, for example, Sally, maybe 1 out of 45 in one class, but 21 out of 45 in another class. So if she's ranked 11th between those two classes, but that doesn't really give a clear indication because she could excel in English or something and then sort of be an okay student in math. And then she's considered like slightly, about an average student, but it's like, is that really fair? Because maybe she's just strong in these areas and weak in these areas. So that's sort of an issue, just even comparing class by class. Any comments or thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this one is a simple question to people. Like, Kenyatta University is one of the top universities here in Kenya. And they might have English majors, and let me double check. But I'm just saying, like, why should there be a difference between an A paper in, let's say there's an English course, an English 101 course, they're reading Romeo and Juliet. Yeah. Why should the standard of an A paper be different between Kenyatta University here, Brown University in the United States of America, or Oxford University in the United Kingdom, or whatever the top university is in China? Just think about it. Should it be the same? Should that paper be graded by exactly the same by each of those institutions, by the professors teaching that English 101 course? Now, I'm not saying one way or the other, but I think the current status is it wouldn't be graded the same. But just in general, this is a thought experiment, or this is a question to you. Why would that be different? Can you defend why it should be different? Would you defend why it should be exactly the same? What is something you can go with that?
Well, because I was going to add on too, I mentioned about having for my practicals, I had chefs who were easier and they liked me. But I remember when I was taking my final one, the two chefs right before I took it were two of the toughest chefs in school. And those were the types who would fail people by half a point or whatever. So you think about that, it's like you also have to factor that in. Like if the students who failed with them, if they took other chefs, they might have gotten a higher grade. But then if I had those chefs, I might have failed. So it's like, those things kind of become unclear too. But ideally you're supposed to be grading everyone by the same standard. So it becomes a bit harder when you have the chefs with the different standards and level of rigor and all that.
Okay.
Oh, like one example was Spätzle, the German dumpling thing. In school, we typically sauteed it, but one of these chefs was German, and he said, "Oh, in Germany, we don't saute it." So he actually gave the kid points off for that, but the kid didn't know. So there's things like that. He's like, I guess he was like, "Oh, in Germany, we don't cook it this way," and it's like, well, okay, but how is the kid supposed to know that? And then it's like, but then in school and other classes, we sauteed it. And I remember when I made it, I sauteed it for the other chef, and it was, I got a good mark. So it's like things like that. It's how do you? And then I remember one of my friends was like, "Oh, I would have asked him in advance exactly what he would have wanted." And it's like, but then do you have to do that each time? Like, or would you actually have done that? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I just checked, and they have an undergraduate to bachelor degree program of English and Linguistics. This is from the Department of Literature, Linguistics, and Foreign Languages. So you see here, English is a foreign language. I don't understand. With Kenya, it's the lingua franca, I guess, would be Swahili, and English is also spoken widely. It was a British colony. And then there's about 40 or more tribes, and they only have their own tribal dialects. But in general, if you're in Nairobi, you can find people that speak English or Swahili, but then the tribal tongues are there. So here it's still kind of considered a foreign language. But I don't understand countries like the United States of America or England itself that actually have like English language majors. But they have the bachelor's in education in English and linguistics. They have a master's of English and linguistics level 700, master's of English and linguistics level 800, postgraduate diploma in translation studies. Now, I think that one makes a lot of sense. I guess that would be people translating English into the different tribes and Swahili and things like that, or the inverse for people from English-speaking countries who want to do business and have different relations with people in Kenya. That could be important. It's a practical, I think. That's one very practical application of being, I think, an English major, I guess I would say. And I know at least one person that I studied with in Rome who is actually a translator, and does some freelance work. He's worked with some international organizations and stuff like that. And master's in applied linguistics and PhD in English and linguistics. So that's the kind of stuff that's there. But yeah, I'm saying with this one, why shouldn't the coursework for these things be exactly the same through those four institutions I mentioned? Kenyatta University, one of the top universities in Shanghai in China, or Brown University, or Oxford in England. Why should they have different syllabus? Why should they have different information and content to have somebody who at the end has a master's in applied linguistics? Why should it be different?
Well, I also got annoyed too at like how growing up the Hispanic kids would take Spanish and just ace it because they knew the class because they knew everything. I was like, is that really fair? It's like I took French. I mean, I enjoy taking, but is that fair though? And then I had an Italian friend at another school. My school didn't offer Italian, but he did the same thing. I was like, "What language did you take?" He's like, "Italian, easy grade." He was born there, so he spoke the language. I'm like, is this really fair? I mean, it's like there should almost be some rule because it's like. If you speak Spanish perfectly, why are you able to just take it and get an easy grade? Because they'd say, "Oh, well, you guys speak English and you're taking English classes." It's like, yes, but it's talking about other things. We're talking about grammatical structure. We're talking about, I mean, I guess Spanish is too, but like it's about literature. It's about writing composition, all this. If you're just writing and speaking a language you already know, I mean, and it's just, you know most of the grammar, you know the spelling, like what are you really being challenged on? Like, why are you even there?
It is an odd thing because like I saw some notes from my school saying I was fluent in French when I was 5 year old, at least as fluent for a 5-year-old, and then I forgot it. And I took it again in 8th grade. I think I was still in middle school. I took it in middle school and in high school, and I don't think it might have come back to me a bit more since I had lived in France and I had previously spoken it. But I know once I finally got to Italy and I was actually now trying to take Italian courses there, I would think I was actually saying things in Italian, but it was actually the French kicking in and like
Yeah.
messing up my ability to actually learn Italian at the same kind of level. So that was it could be something with that. So it's but yeah, this Spanish speaker is taking that course, but then now is it completely unfair for an English speaker to take an English? I just don't really see some of the
No,
purpose.
but again, English, like I say, it's not just you do learn grammar and things, but it's also you have to write essays and it's reading
Yeah,
comprehension. So it's
English
not just
literature is different
yeah.
than English than Spanish as a foreign language or like French as a foreign
Yeah.
language, which is what I was taking. I was taking those courses as
Yeah.
foreign language. I took French as a foreign
Yeah.
language requirement because I'd forgotten it pretty much entirely. So yeah, that's completely different than, as we mentioned, with something like translation or English literature, where you're actually English literature, I think, is more about the books and the culture and the ideas and the history and so it's more than just, hey, this
Yeah.
can you speak English? Because if it's just can you speak English, is something related to what we were talking about before, like sorry, dihydroxy monoxide. I saw this something where someone went around and was talking to college students at some protest. I think it was like an anti-Trump protest or something, and they were talking about this person wanted people to ban dihydroxy monoxide and was listing off the things like, oh, people so many people like die from ingesting too much of this, or it has this effects on these different things. So they're just talking about, they were listing just basic effects of dihydroxy monoxide, and people were like, yeah, that sounds horrible, we need to ban it. And dihydroxy monoxide is just H2O. It's just
Yeah.
water. So they were just listing things like the deaths to it. They were counting like people who drown in water.
Yeah.
So they're counting those as like deaths due to dihydroxy monoxide or ingestion of dihydroxy monoxide. So you list those, and people, because you think you understand the terms, like you hear the English term dihydroxy monoxide. If you understand the structure of words, what those are, what the di means, and hydroxy, what that means, and mono, then oxide, you should know that's H2O. But then what does it even mean to be fluent in English anymore? We're just seeing all the confusions that we have currently going on in the sociopolitical sphere where, oh, this person said coyote. What does he mean? What does he mean? Trump means like a coyote is actually carrying people across the border. It's like, no, that's slang. Like, come on. Like, words don't really mean what they mean. So yeah.
Well, I remember too at CIA they sold this salt. It was brownish and it says enhanced by the color of iron oxide. Well, I know iron oxide is rust, so it's like it sounds a lot nicer than
There
it
was a
really
salt
is.
like that?
Yeah, yeah. It's
Why?
it's like it's like a reddish brownish color. It actually looks kind of nice, but it's like you just see iron oxide and you're like, I'm like, wait a minute, that's rust. It's like you go out in the backyard and get rust.
Yeah, but why would and it probably has a markup, huh?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember because there's volcanic salt. You remember in our French Laundry video, they talk about that. Like it's harvested from these like really deep pits that go back like millions of years, and then volcanic stuff. Of course, it's influenced by the ash and the lava, so it has like a smokier characteristic, and it's black. The lava salt actually looks kind of nice. Like you can put it on fish and things. It has this nice black sort of design. Yeah, but it's just funny because like iron oxide. I'm like, come on, I know that's rust.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Gotcha. All right, so this next section here, it's comparing different students. So, for example, they compare Harry and Sally, and assuming they have identical schedules for 4 years. So, if Sally gets better grades than Harry in every class, we can say that she's a better student than Harry. Of course, I think that's pretty clear. But we can't. It's a little bit tougher when it comes down to calculating their GPAs, because one of the examples the authors make is that if they were to get 50-50 A's and B's, but each one were to get A's and B's in different classes, it would kind of give the impression that each one is stronger in different areas. So they might have the final GPA or close to it. But as far as employers and things, it gets a little tougher because, like, let's say Harry's better at math and she's better at writing. Okay, well, if he goes to apply for an accounting job or something, you would want to know that because that's more significant. And it gets a little tougher. And then they also talk about comparing majors, not just majors in schools, because again, it's like certain, like philosophy, for example, is a harder major, but then they're also get into the school versus school. Like, for example, the University of Chicago, they say, is one of the toughest schools. Brown is considered a top school, but it's considered easier for a lot of people. Like Thomas Sowell talks about at Chicago, and Friedman's class was really tough. And I think Friedman actually kicked him out of class at one point or something. Like he wasn't. So that's the thing. And that, I mean, that, obviously PhD, he trained under George Stigler as well. I think, I'm trying to think it was Frank Knight who trained Stigler, and like Knight passed like very few people. So again, it's like, an A at that school versus another school, it's going to be a much different thing. And then it's funny here too, because they talk about, there's that line, you can't reduce people to a number, man. And then they go, well, we can. And Jason even wrote a book arguing that you can put meaningful dollar values on individual lives. I guess he talked about insurance and things like that. And and the issue here is that, ultimately we do have to reduce these things to numbers, but the criticism, it's their methodology for doing it. It's not doing it in of itself, because it's like you have to find some way to distinguish student quality, obviously, as far as their work ethic, all that, but it's the way it's being measured isn't really reliable.
Yeah.
Thoughts, comments?
That's this one of the things here is, as I mentioned with the comparison on the 4 different continents, the different courses, when the people who again are supportive of some sort of universal education system, saying, oh, everyone has a right to this. For those in America, why are you focused on just Americans? Like, why should you have access to that or a kid in Kenya does? Like, why should you have 4 years of college before every kid in Kenya has 1 year of middle school, for example, like an average middle school in the United States of America? What makes you so important that you're saying that the people who are against universal basic indoctrination and the people who are against this sort of free, as you say, education think people should be dumb, think people shouldn't actually get things? Why are you only advocating it for Americans instead of advocating it for the entire world? Do you want the rest of the world to be stupid? Do you want kids to not be able to speak good and know informations in other countries? Is that what you want for the rest of the world? Or are you just being selfish? Let me know. Yeah. So moving on.
So the next section, we're going to get into those 9 languages that I mentioned above as far as what grades are measuring. So again, they're incoherent because they could mean different things depending on the classes. They could be compare the rankings. Again, if they grade on a bell curve, it could be comparing students to other students in that same section. It could be comparing students to any section of a given class versus another class. It could even be spread out among professors. Like, it could be comparing students year by year, university by university. It gets tough here. So grades as qualitative evaluations are incoherent because they could reflect how well a student did according to a professor's absolute standards, although the professor might have different standards. The letter grade may reflect how well the student did according to the university, but of course that differs school to school. The letter grade may indeed reflect an absolute universal standard. So they talked about, again, Economics 101, Boise State versus Princeton. The Economics 101 classes are the same. So that is a universal standard. So again, that's the first 3 languages. It could be a professor's absolute standards. It could be the university standards, or it could be a universal standard. And then, of course, you want to break it down elementary level. You have things like the Regents test, or of course, nationally, you have SATs. So there's that as well. So a grade could reflect what percentage of questions and problems a student got correct according to professor standards. But again, that may vary professor to professor. Again, how tough the questions are, but also how many there are. A grade could reflect university standards as well, but that could vary as well. In talking about what percentage of questions they got right. Again, different grades may have different number of multiple choice questions and also different level of difficulty. And then, of course, they could get what they got right and wrong on a universal scale. Again, SATs or the Regents or something, where it's, okay, everyone nationwide is taking this test, so it's based off of that. But, of course, the challenge for that also becomes, is it wise to put everyone to the same standard, especially if we acknowledge there are disparities in intelligence and things like that, different learning styles. Like, there's challenges either way, because on the one hand, if it becomes such a niche thing where it's like, okay, we're just challenging these people and we know exactly how these students learn, what challenges, all that. That may be very good for those students. But then at the same time, you can't apply that on a universal scale. But then the question is also, should you apply it on a universal scale? Because a lot of students fall through the cracks. Like they talk about the physical fitness tests, how those can be tougher because students may have different levels of body fat. Like students may have different levels of endurance, all that. And then even some students may just not want to play sports, but then it's like, should they be punished for not doing that? Because it's like, it's a little tough to hold everyone to that one standard. That's a larger point. So,
yeah.
And then,
that's
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can finish up.
So then they could mean a lot of different things. And it's like, it's not clear what should they mean? What do they measure exactly? And then again, different people could make different cases for these different things. And then they also add here too that professors will tend to sort of insert their own meanings. So again, like what's A for one professor might be a B or C for another, and that as well. And again, it's like professors who like the students, how much do they agree with them? Those are realities. As I keep saying, academics are not this like sacred class that throw all their biases out the window. No, they're people. They have biases. They favor certain people, same as anyone else.
Yeah.
So then I just have one quote here. Over 100 years ago, Guy Montrose Whipple wrote, "When we consider the practically universal use in all educational institutions of a system of marks, whether numbers or letters, to indicate scholastic attainment of the pupils or students in these institutions, and when we remember how very great stress is laid by teachers and pupils alike upon these marks as real measures or indicators of attainment, we can but be astonished at the blind faith that has been felt in the reliability of the marking system. School administrators have been using with confidence an absolutely uncalibrated instrument. What we know is what are the traits, qualities, or capacities we are trying to measure in our marking systems? How are these capacities distributed in the body of pupils or students? What method ought to follow? What method ought we to follow in measuring these capacities? What faults appear in these marking systems that we are now using, and how can they be avoided or minimized?" This was written 100 years ago, and I would argue it still holds up today. And as the authors say, 100 years later, we still can't answer some of these questions. We just have faith. This is how the system works. Let's just keep using it.
Yeah.
Any thoughts or comments?
It's a thing when you're trying to balance this whole thing between this one size fits all type of thing, or we should have this equality or equity at the most, but then people aren't equal. We're a diverse kind of people. So why are people even okay with having something like the SAT or the ACT, but they think that is a good enough measure to measure someone's ability in order to enter the university? But then at the university level, would they support having that standardized sort of testing, that standardized sort of courses, standardized schools, where you just have the entire school systems as they are, but now every school has, if you're teaching a certain course, you have to get it from the same people that organize the SAT. I don't think people would be supportive of that.
Yeah.
And as for the personal people, we're talking about that Thomas Sowell quote, how many of you think if you took the SAT today, you would score better or worse? I think for most people, it would probably be worse than they scored when they were a kid. But do they think they're more capable as now than they were when they were a child? And I think for most people, it would be the inverse. Most people would consider themselves they'd be more capable now just to deal with life than they were when they were 16 or 14, 15, 16, wherever the age range most people take the SAT is. So what does that SAT actually say about what you're going to be like in the rest of your life? Even you personally, I'm not saying like, oh, you can probably find correlation that people in general who scored higher in their SATs seem to earn more, things like that. But I'm just talking about on the personal aspect. Do you as a person think if you took the SAT today, you would score more than you scored when you took it in high school? And what does that say about the importance of the SAT compared to your actual status in life today?
Well, I was going to say my grandpa's kind of an interesting case there because he graduated salutatorian from Gonzaga. If you know, that's one of the top prep schools in D.C. He also graduated from Notre Dame with honors. But he admits, he's like, I don't remember anything I learned at Gonzaga. He's like, I took French. I've forgotten all of it. Like, I don't remember any. He's like, a lot of the history. He's like me. Like, he's learned it on his own. I mean, he was obviously a good student. He has an engineering degree, so of course he's good with math, especially from a good school. But he's like, I don't remember a lot of what I learned there. And then for me, I feel like I'm sort of the reverse, where like I didn't try that hard in school, but things that I'm interested in, I make an effort to learn about and I can recall them from memory. But it's because I took the initiative and because I wanted to learn them, I can remember them. Whereas you get people like him. I mean, he had a very successful career, of course, but in school, he's not going to look back and say, "Oh, I learned all this valuable information, which I'll use forever." No, he crammed to get to pass the test, to ace the test, and then just forgot it afterwards. He's admitted that a few times. Yeah.
Oh, cool. I checked here. I wanted to see when it started. It said, when did the SAT start? This is from petersons.com. The SAT was founded in 1926 as an adaptation of the Army Alpha, an IQ test which had been used to check the intelligence of recruits to the Army. For this test, taken only by a few thousand college applicants, eventually came a modern SAT test as we know it. So yeah, that's kind of it's kind of interesting that it started at that point. Wait, and then this is new. I didn't know this was happening. The College Board, this is from businessjournals.com. The College Board, which runs a widely used academic skills test, is changing the scoring system from a 24,000 to a 16,000, or switching back. So I guess they switched it for some time to 2,400. When I took it, it was out of 1,600. But I guess they changed it to 2,400, and now they changed it back in the 2014. So how long was it at 2,400? What was it when you were in high school?
Well, I don't remember. Like I said, I wasn't a great student, so I mean, I just took it, and that was I don't.
And then some places take the SAT, some places take the ACT. So like I think it's what is Scholastic Aptitude Test is what the SAT stands for. I think the ACT stands for. And let me see what the ACT stands for. What does ACT stand for? It's not put in here. Do you know what it stands for? What is it? What does ACT stand for?
Ooh.
I think American College Testing. What? That doesn't sound right. Yeah. What? I mean, I guess that's straightforward. It's straightforward.
Yeah.
It's an American.
I thought it'd be
College
something more sophisticated. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like acquired, like
collegiate.
Yeah. So no, it's just American College. That's kind of boring.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, that's my thoughts for this section.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about, of course, the ethical problem. So just as discussed in the last section, professors owe it to their students to give them clear signals about their performance. Again, like that was the issue with the last thing about the professor evaluations aren't great. So it's not really clear, are the students rating them on their good looks, their charm, and all that, or is it actually how good they are at teaching? So we act as if grades communicate some sort of standard of meaning, but they really don't. These incoherent numbers have an effect on a student's future. Again, even class by class, it's not clear what these grades mean. For example, some professors giving more feedback or clarity than others. Like I mentioned, the German chef who didn't tell people that he didn't want spätzle sauteed, even though other professors did, and there was no explanation for that. Again, some make it clear that what the the plus and the minus signs mean, others don't. Some use letter grades or to reflect linear or logarithmic grading, others don't. Again, writing versus math or something. The authors say here, measuring GPA is like calculating Sally's average height, weight, 40-meter dash, vocal range, and max 1 rep bench press. I thought that was a funny way to put it because they're trying to make the point that you're measuring all these things in different ways by different standards, and is it really a coherent guide? We would argue no. So some employers and admissions committees are actually even aware of this, and they pay less attention to GPA now because they're saying, like, unless you have like a really high or really low, if you're really high, they're going to think you're a good student. If you're really low, you obviously you either need help or you're not trying. But of course, most in between, it gets kind of murky because, again, are you average across the board? Are you great in some areas, weak in some areas? It's a little harder to say. So does a high GPA correlate with conscientiousness, perseverance, good time management skills, etc.? There isn't much development or research on this. One major paper shows that the relationship between GPA and job future is weak, which I think is kind of interesting because some people have said that if you look at certain high school classmates, like the valedictorians often are not the most successful ones. Like they usually live good lives, but there's often other people like my grandfather talks about being a salutatorian at Gonzaga, and he said, he's like, there were a lot of people below me who were way smarter, but they didn't apply themselves as fully, and then they took off later. Like, one of his classmates ended up running the advanced physics department at Stanford. So obviously very intelligent guy. And he's saying, he's like, this guy was way smarter than me, but he kind of half-assed his schoolwork and then later really worked hard. And then he arrived at his full potential. Whereas my grandfather was saying, I may not have been innately as smart, but I crammed really hard, so I was able to get top marks. So you have to weigh in those factors too. And a paper by Frank Schmidt and John Hunter did a meta-analysis, and they found that the correlation between GPA and job success is only 0.34, so it's not really that strong. Some papers have shown that high school GPAs are stronger predictors of success, but that it's most likely because they'll get into better colleges, which means better careers and income, et cetera. So that goes back to the last point about selection versus treatment effects. These are already people who work hard, do well. Because again, my grandfather's talking about his other classmates. They were still good students. I mean, they still went to Gonzaga, which is a top prep school. So it's like they were still good students. They just didn't push themselves to their limit until later. So you have to factor that in as well. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, I think that was a good point on saying the way they measure different things. Even if you appreciate the grading system, the grading for your physical education course is going to be on a different level than the grading for your English literature course. Yeah. So why should those two grades be lumped together to come up with a GPA? Like, what does that really test for? What does that really select for? And if you can look at other forms of kind of grading of people flourishing and being successful in certain fields, and with these other things, we're like, what does it actually test? How do you actually test for somebody to be, what if somebody's saying, okay, we're developing this person who's going to be the chair of, we said the Stanford Department for what? For
advanced physics.
For advanced physics. Like, what do you test for that? What is the requirement? So if you're saying, okay, you want the child to get that position, what are the things you put them through? What are the parameters? It's not that straightforward.
No.
But you look at something like the National Football League. That's the Professional American Football League in the United States of America. And the amount of people that play in the United States of America as kids and peewee and things like that is millions. Then you go to like the thousands of schools and high schools and middle schools that play it. Then you go to the Division I schools. I think it's about 104, 114. And then there's Division II. I think there's another 200 more schools. And then with Division III, I think that might be another 150 or more. So you have, now that's down to about 100 people per school. So you're talking about maybe like 20,000 people from there. And then from there, it comes to the National Football League. And that's, I think there's a few other semi-pro leagues or pro leagues to that level. There used to be XFL that went down. There used to be arena football you can play in Europe. There's other like localized smaller ones if you actually go out and find them. But the actual top one is the National Football League with 32 teams, if I'm not mistaken. That league has known rules, set rules. You play at a set amount of time with a set number of people, millions of dollars going into the statistics and finding out who the people are, millions of dollars going in on the drafting process and going in and saying, and actual measurables, this person of this height who can run this fast over this distance with this amount of reps on strength has been able to do, we can go and we can check 50 other players of these players, they achieved these kind of statistics. They get this stuff down to like full-on scientific, so much data, and they still blow out. They still go and spend millions of dollars on somebody who checks all those marks, and then because of some weird quirk in their life, they just happen to be garbage. Then on the inverse, you have the Tom Brady's who was picked like in the 6th round, and then now he's considered one of the greatest football players to ever have played. So even when you have a system that rigorous, with that much money being invested, in a rather set kind of system of these are the things this person's going to be able to do, the rules they were playing at in Pee Wee football are pretty much the same rules they were playing at in National Football League. It's a bigger, not even a bigger field. It's normally a 100-yard field. You got these little 8-year-olds running on a 100-yard field. This looks odd. But anyway, those rules are still the same. It's still tackle. It's still forward passes. It's still, the time might be a little different. But in general, it's that same system. And you still have people just missing out. So why do people have such trust, blind trust, into something as nebulous and as undefined as the current higher education system, higher schooling system, to be something that can actually select that, to the point where if somebody, like, we're having these conversations, if this book is being written, people are like, oh, you're attacking the system. Like, No, we're raising questions because what makes you think this is the best possible system that we could possibly have? Yeah.
Well, I thought of something too. One of my favorite actors, Gary Oldman, he actually was turned down from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and they welcomed to try again the following year, but they said, we recommend you do something else for a living. I mean, he ends up becoming this very. So again, you have to wonder: did someone there not like him? Was he he had the potential, but he was unrefined at the time? Did he really find his true talent take off? Yeah, there's so many things to look at in that. I mean, obviously, you look at him today, you can't say he's a terrible actor in terms of. I mean, I would argue just the diverse range of roles he plays, but also how much money he brings in, and he's interesting too because he keeps a very low profile, which they said is unusual. Like normally actors want to be in the spotlight, but you don't constantly hear about his marriage or his dating or parties or.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't even know what country he's from or where he
he's
lives.
British.
Like, okay, I'm not surprised. Well, you said the school, so that makes sense. He was applying there. Does he still live in the UK? Does he live in Hollywood? Does he live like outside? Like where does he live? But it's not important.
He was born in New Cross, England. Let's see.
Don't put his stuff out there. I was just asking that to
this is Wikipedia though.
Okay. No, but I was saying in general, like with some actors, I could just be like, yeah, like Don Cheadle, I know he's in LA because he's like tweeting about all like politics and all these other things all the time. Like there's all these other people. Like, this is something I still don't understand. This is something that's going on right now. By the time we actually post this, it definitely is going to be after the election, I think, and we'll see Trump has won again. But I don't understand why celebrities keep thinking that their endorsements are actually going to do anything. There must be some people. I'm confident there's probably at least 10,000 people who a celebrity endorsement is actually the primary reason they voted for someone. I don't necessarily see it being them switching a vote. I can't see somebody being like, okay, I was going to vote for Kanye West because I agree, or I'm just doing it for the lulz, or I don't like the current candidates. And then they hear Jennifer Aniston say voting for Kanye isn't a joke. And then they're like, oh, she was in Friends. Rachel from Friends, of course. Like, yeah, she was married to Brad Pitt. Yeah, she said this. So I'm going to re-examine my life and actually go vote for Trump or Biden. I think there might be like 5 people in the world, in the United States of America, tops that would have that reaction. But I don't understand that whole idea where acting selects for something very specific. So why would you expect that ability to go into any other? Oh, the actors from West Wing, they acted in a movie doesn't mean they know. They acted in a series about the White House doesn't mean they know anything more about the White House, who should be in the White House, than you do. Like the athletes, like why do people do this? It's so weird.
Well, there was a story about you remember Perry Mason, right? My parents they still watch that. That was an older show, but what's it?
Was it the detective type of guy?
It was the lawyer who always won every case. And there was a joke about how someone asked Raymond Burr, the actor in real life, of some legal thing. And he's like, I have no idea. And they're like, come on, aren't you a lawyer? He goes, you only see me play one on Saturday nights.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. Yeah.
it's strange. You see something like that. Like this happens more with the fandoms type of things. It's more in the sci-fi and fantasy type of fandoms where they have things. I think some people reacted to an odd way to the way Picard, the actor Patrick Stewart, was acting, and they're like, well, in Star Trek, he's such a this, he's such a that. I'm like, that's in Star Trek. He's playing a character. Like he's not exactly like the character. Like this kid, people are like, oh, I can't believe William Shatner is doing this and this. Oh, I can't believe this person isn't depending. It's a paycheck. Like it's like going to like Five Guys and then being surprised that the cashier from McDonald's is having a burger at Five Guys. It's like that's their job.
Yeah.
like what makes you think just because they work at McDonald's means they have McDonald's? No, it's just their job. Five Guys makes better burgers, so they go there for a burger. Like, come on now. Yeah.
So the authors have a few points here. How do we fix this? It's complicated. So one idea is short qualitative descriptions in different areas of the course. So, for example, writing quality, which again, how do we measure that? Time management, creativity, etc. What percentage of students receive these different evaluations, so we can make sure they're being applied consistently. The students ranking in class, or how many standard deviations below or above the average student is. So then that's when the deans and provosts and everyone can look at that and say, is this professor overly harsh? Are they overly lax if everyone's getting A's, things like that? what percentile the professor estimates a student falls in regard to different skills compared to other students the professor has taught over their career. So they could find some way to say, okay, is the professor watering down their curriculum over the course of time? And that's one of the issues with the student evaluations, is that they know they'll get punished with bad evaluations that'll affect their promotions and other things. So they'll water down their curriculum to get easier grades. But then that gets into the issue with the student evaluations, which we covered in the last chapter. Now, this like with the student evaluations, it would be more complicated and time consuming. It would give better answers, but I think a lot of people are complacent with the status quo just because it's easier and cheaper and all that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean it's hard to do. Yeah. It's hard to actually do a grading system on some of these things. If you're actually grading it, it's the key is how well do the kids do after this course. If you say this is a course to teach somebody this information so they can apply this information in this way. If it's about how well somebody can take a test, just admit that. Yeah. But if it's about how well somebody achieves, how much somebody can make, or how productive they can be in the rest of their life, then that should be just the key thing that decides a lot of these things. And I know with some places, and this is something that's also unfortunate, people have bought into that and they think if Harvard just lets in my kid, automatically they're going to that means they would do better. And there could be some things in there to an extent where some lady might be more biased to hire you if you come from Harvard versus Keene State University. But once that person is actually in that position, chances are the person from Keene State University who knows the actual content more, if it's a job with something that's actually delivering on a product versus the kind of connections type of things where some people are just like, oh, this is the son of so-and-so, this person met this and this, so we're just doing this thing and doing this other thing on the side. So if you actually do the things where it comes down to it, can you actually design this thing? Can you actually account for this kind of accounting? Can you actually engineer this thing? That should be something that I think is more tied into the actual grading of the actual if efficacy of whichever teacher or school that you're actually in.
Well, I remember like where I work in the place I've worked previously, like one indication if a server is good is look at the tips they get. If they get above average regularly, that's a good sign. Or the other point that comes up is that if people come back and regularly ask for that person, that's a good sign. Like there was that beverage director who I mentioned who I worked with, who was kind of annoying, but customers loved him. Like they asked for him regularly. So it's like, but that's a measurement, because and my GM told me this one-on-one, he's like, you have to make yourself maybe not irreplaceable, but really valuable, where if you're missing, people are going to notice. You have to be the person they come back, hey, is this person here? Hey, does he have my favorite table? All that. And then if you were to get replaced, they'd be like, people would say, hey, this place lost something. You have to be able to provide that kind of value. So.
I think integral. Integral? Integral.
I say integral.
Yeah.
So let's see here.
I think that's the key thing.
So they ask, do grades work? Many countries around the world don't use the A through F scale. And it's only been the U.S. for about a century. Before, universities gave written feedback and evaluations, but no letter grades or final class averages. Experimental data suggests grades do little to help students improve their work. R. Butler and M. Neeson found that grades were better than no feedback whatsoever, but descriptive feedback was the best. So you want to give some level of feedback because that's how people improve, but they find that the written out descriptive feedback or a conversation one-on-one is better. And again, I saw that in culinary school, like the practical, the chef says, you did this well, however, this is wrong. The flavor is good, but it's not hot enough, things like that. So at least you can sort of say, okay, I know what I screwed up on and I know what to watch out for next time. And based on the studies, students' grades seem to cause stress and anxiety. Now, of course, to be clear, the argument isn't that grading undermines education, but it's not. Grading doesn't undermine education, but it's not clear that it helps it either. I don't know if you saw a few weeks ago, James Lindsay was making fun of this guy who wanted to abolish grades completely, and he said something like, "Oh, your best ideas came about when you were in second grade," or something like that. You know, it's like we're not saying, the authors are not saying, and I wouldn't either, not saying abolish all standards, but at least reevaluate how these standards are measured, how they come about, and hopefully we can find a better way to measure things accurately, both reliably and validly. Yes.
And that's another thing. We see that being done, where people say, oh, this group of people, due to their background, their ancestors, should be judged on this set of things, but then this other group of people should be excused from that kind of judgment because of Y level of things. And that's like, okay, why exactly are we doing this now? And then, yeah, so that's the thing. And I guess you mentioned the grading system as well here. So that's something that brought up at the start. And just again, in clarification for people watching these, if it's the first thing you've watched, or I don't know if I mentioned much in the series, with some of these, it's going to be different in the next one we do, where we're both going to be reading the content. But in this one, it's Steven's actually read this content and he's taken down notes, and he's leading me through this and trying to give me the summary, and I'm giving thoughts. So some of the things I jump on a topic earlier, that's actually something that's actually he's going to go over later on. So excuse for that. Yeah.
Sure. So the next section is what about grade inflation? This was kind of an interesting section because I guess what they found surprised me a little bit. I'll just get into it here. So the authors were originally going to write a chapter on grade inflation, but they started digging in. They found there isn't actually good information that it exists in the first place, which sort of surprised me because for a while I was someone who believed grades have been inflated. They said it gets hard to measure because the average GPA has gone up, but it's also been wondered if quality of work has gone up as well, and also who they're selecting into school, because also you have to factor in with more choice in curricula. Students may pick easier courses. They may get better grades in them. So if students pick some pop culture class, they're going to work hard. They're going to get an A. But it's like, can you say that they're not performing as well, or they just have it easier? Then, of course, as we've been talking about, lower university standards, and then again, the issues with student evaluations and professors giving more lax grades. So it gets kind of into murky territory. And one factor is they say, yeah, again, students have more classes to take, so students are doing a better job of sorting themselves. Colleges also have more tutoring and support services than before, so they're wondering like how many people would have fallen through the cracks before getting a bit more support now, which is good, of course. Professors may be better teachers than in the past, so they've talked about different professors performing for different forms of teaching, and of course, internet and things. Again, we can debate some of that, but it's kind of hard to measure. Ivy League schools have gotten more selective over time. Like they talk about the median student in Harvard's freshman class of 1950 would have been in the bottom 10% in 1960. So there's sort of an interesting dynamic there because on the one hand, they're more selective when it comes to the merit-based things, but then you still have to believe there is nepotism, affirmative action, and other things. So does that kind of offset? Are they more selective because they want to? There's certain people they'll let in for those reasons, but then they're more selective for other reasons. I don't know. It's a little unclear how you would measure
as you
some of that.
mentioned also before, like what are they selecting for? What's the requirements? Of the requirements themselves, even if the requirements are the same, are those requirements being applied the same? Like, is your average high school student selected in the same way in the 1920s as they were in the 1950s, or as they were in 2020? Like, I think that might change.
Well, I think you know too about the Asian Americans suing the Ivy Leagues because there's so many, they're overrepresented, quote unquote, that they need higher test scores to get in. But they're like, well, wait a minute, why do we have to work harder? And then for black kids, they're lowering the scores. But then it's like, so what? We work hard and we get punished? That's not fair. And it's just, there's that whole lawsuit. And they said how it's funny because some of the people in the schools are Asian too. So it's actually Asians suing Asians, but this is being presented as some black on white thing. You know? And it raises all these other questions. And of course, we've talked about a few times now, who are the top earners in this country: Indians, Filipinos, Japanese, Koreans, Jews, Nigerians, etc. So I mean, I always say, like, as a white American, I could probably learn a lot from these other groups for sure.
Yeah.
So average SAT scores have gone down over time, but they also said a higher percentage of students now take the SAT and more students are pushed into going to college. So in the past, these types would have either gone to trade school or just started working. So again, it's like, I remember someone pointing this out to me years ago that, SAT scores have gone down. Well, just more people take it. It's sort of like, how many people have the virus? Oh, we have all these cases. Well, we're just testing more now. So, of course, more cases are going to come up. Somebody pointed that out recently with the flu as well. If you were to test everybody, it would register that we have a lot of people with the flu, but how many people are carrying it not being affected? It's just we know what people are scoring now. Same thing. And we do know about price inflation in the economy. Like, they can obviously weigh the price of a gallon of milk in 1960 versus now, all that. Of course, you can get into other things about, is it organic? Where does it come from? All that, but we can measure those things as objectively. And then to prove that grade inflation exists, someone would have to show that GPAs have increased faster than the quality of students' work. But again, that gets into other things we've been talking about. And in short, there's not enough information to really measure it. This section was sort of surprising because I was one of these people who believed that grade inflation was a serious issue, but based on all these other things, it's not clear that it is, or even how you could measure it exactly.
Yeah, because in my mind, I had grade inflation being something where it's there's some standards being set, and then per the course, a teacher will decide from one year to the next if this paper, not from one year. I think I was thinking more of not grade inflation, but that thing where you say, wait, what's the thing where you skew the grades over, where it's no longer 80% is no longer considered a B, but you drop down B to like 75 because of the spread of
like grading on a bell curve, but you're shifting the bell curve. You're saying,
yeah, something like that. I thought that's kind of what I think I had in mind with grade inflation was that's what was happening. Like papers that used to be Bs were actually considered to be As now. And we have things like in Common Core. I have some friends who are teachers, and I've talked to some of my older teachers and professors and talked about something in Common Core where it's like, okay, automatically, if somebody just writes their name, they get 50 points out of 100. So now with that, they just, let's say there's 100 questions, all they have to do is get 10 right, and then they pass. So at the bottom, if that's part of it in there, that might not be directly inflating the grades, but then now if you have less people who can actually fail because you've already been given that basic 50% just by showing up or putting down your name on the paper, that might be included in there. Then you have fewer people failing, and then that could be a form of grade manipulation. But I guess what they're talking about was inflation was entire departments saying like, no, the schools themselves don't happen to be doing better. But then if you add, like, let's say you had a class, a school that was perfect fine arts, and that was all it was high level fine art portraiture with like making your own oil paints, your own canvases, and going in and digging and doing just like the way the old masters did. And then all of a sudden you just added courses like online with digital color filling. You now had a course for that. Then 50%, all of a sudden you have 50% more people in your school actually taking that course where they're just filling in colors on some digital things where they can do it over and over again. That might raise the amounts of people getting A's, but the actual content of the school would be reduced. So I don't know if they've looked in for that, where it's like, okay, certain schools are offering now more things that might not actually be as academically dense or valid as these other things, or they might be so specialized that if somebody decides to take that, chances are they'll like it enough to actually put in the time. So that's the thing, like you said, is it's problematic, and it's hard to really understand and compare these things.
They don't delve into that particular issue, but I've sort of observed it myself, where it's like there's classes on Ebonics now. There was like a class about Beyonce at Rutgers. So again, it's like, if a bunch of like high school kids come out and they decide, oh, we'll take this, we'll get an easy grade. It's like, yeah, you have more A's, but it's like, it's not the same as if everyone takes physics or something, where it's like, you're going to see a lot more people struggling. I know, for example, at culinary school, one of the issues has become, I mentioned previously, you used to have 2 years of restaurant experience. Now they waived that. So because of that, you're getting people who aren't as good and people are going to struggle, but the teachers are actually told we have to pass a certain percentage of students each time. So in that case, I wondered, have they watered down the curricula to a point? And there's also rules too about you can't fail people with certain disabilities. So like for example, there was a guy I knew who had a hearing issue, and the rumor was that's why he kept getting passed, even though he was horrible, because if they failed him, he could say I'm being discriminated against and then sue the school or something. So they were sort of like letting him slide through things. But then it's like he went out into the real world. I remember they said for his internship, they just had him washing dishes for the last like month or two because they were like, this guy can't do anything. So that's the thing. I mean, the real world reality, you can't avoid reality. Eventually it's going to sort out who's good and bad. It's just the criticism is if they're lying to students and telling them, oh yeah, you're doing a great job, they get out into the real world and it's like, no, this isn't the case.
Yeah, I we're just talking about that. I think if you don't mind, I might read these. Sure. I just found like I was trying to find like strange college courses. Now this isn't full on degrees, but this is this courses. Okay, there's some here from the Federalist. So yes, I'm reading far right. This is a far right conversation now, and it's going to be banned because it's reading from the Federalist. University of Illinois, English 277, gender in gaming. University of Michigan, Women's Studies, eco/queer/feminist art practices, University of Minnesota, Marx for Today, this is a 3405, Northwestern University, Unsettling Whiteness, Swarthmore College, Queering God, Feminist and Queer Theory, Middlebury College, American Misogyny, Davidson College, Latinx Sexual Dissidence and Guerrilla Translation, Princeton University, Marx in the 21st Century. That one doesn't really seem that odd. Like okay, it's a course. No. It's not. Like I said, these are not majors. I think Marx in the 21st Century is in this one they go into actual details about the course. So, what would have Marx in the 21st century? Our seminar will examine the contemporary viability of Marx's fundamental concepts such as labor, exploitation, ideology, and revolution. How these concepts can be reimagined for a specific shape of contemporary capitalism. What can Marxism learn from? It seems like a practical thing. Like you can check these out on the Federalist if you want yourself and see if these make sense. Pomona College, Queer in Childhood, University of Georgia, Cuba, and from the Emancipation to Revolution. Some of these seem okay. Yeah. Like Globalism, Capitalism, and Racism. That's from University of Tennessee. Yeah, I don't see a problem with that one.
Yeah.
Brown University, Humanity or Nah, Blackness, Gender, Resistance, and Memory in Monuments, Maps, and Archives. Okay, that sounds kind of weird. I think this might be somebody who just started it up on themselves, like they decided to go in. And now this is for Ranker. Sorry, bear with me for this one. The strangest real college courses. Number 1, Sociology of Miley Cyrus, Race, Class, Gender, and Media. It's from Skidmore College in New York. Yeah. You're talking about considering moving from New York. Maybe you should, just because of that. What if Harry Potter is real? From Appalachian State University. How to win a beauty pageant.
He's not at the end.
College. Okay, that's not. I mean, some people want that.
Well, sorry, what was the last one?
How to win a beauty pageant.
Okay.
And then this one's, look, a chicken. This is from Belmont University, and this is on ranker.com if you want a list of stupidest college courses. This will pursue ways of knowing and embracing little ants carrying morsels of food occurring, what it means to be distracted. Okay, I don't know. Maybe the name is weird. Philosophy of Fish from Oregon State University. Major philosophical theories about art and making, so ancient modern times. Through the lens of fish, offered as Dr. Jenkins. So it follows the band and some. So that could be done. Some of these could just be the title of it, because if you're focusing on art in general, but through a lens of your trip on this one, and okay, the phallus from Occidental College. But they say it's talking about Freud and Lacan through feminist and queer takings on the phallus. Okay, Getting Dressed from Princeton University. How to Watch Television from Montclair State University. Sport for the Spectator from Ohio State University. The Art of Walking from Centre College. Stupidity from Occidental College, which I don't think is a negative class thing. That's good, even the title. Zombies in Popular Media from Columbia. Now, if this is part of they have a department maybe on TV, on television, or film and things like that. And I think they would. New York has a significant movie, TV, film production environment, and also with Broadway and things like that. So it can make sense. They could have a department for that. So I think zombies are big enough to have a course. Arguing with Jog Judy, that's from University of California, Berkeley. Invented Languages, Klingon and Beyond. I think that's an okay course. Maple Syrup, The Real Thing from Alfred University. Learning from YouTube, Fights Our College, trying to put themselves out of business. The Joys of Garbage from Santa Clara University. Virtual People from Stanford, Cyberporn in Society from Buffalo. There's 2 more. Street Fighting Mathematics, it could be okay from MIT, and Introduction to Wines from Cornell University. So yeah, those are some of the titles. I'm saying with some of these courses now, these courses are being thrown in with the same theoretical level of like physics and stuff like that. That was a high level physics. That those have maintained the same status that they did back in 1920 with the limited knowledge that they have. But there wasn't an Introduction to Wines equivalent course back then. So when you're looking at total GPAs, that could be part of why. Chances are it's not too hard to pass Introduction to Wines. Let me just put it that way. I think the average person could pass that course. But the average person would not be able to pass a physics course at Cornell.
Well, I was going to say with our in economics, we do have to bear in mind value is subjective, but then where this runs into ethical concerns is how much of these classes cost, where does the money come from, who's paying, could there be a potential taxpayer bailout, all that. Like, you want to read about this stuff on your own time, your own expense, whatever. I don't care. The issue is when it gets into borrowing large amounts of money, and then if they decide let's bail everyone out, okay, I and others may end up paying for it, and that's the issue that I have. And then it's like I don't have a moral obligation to fund people's hobbies. I mean, because I'll talk about some of the stuff like this, and people will be like, "Oh, well, that sounds cool. I'd like to learn that." I'm like, nobody's stopping you, but should you be able to borrow thousands of dollars that you may never pay back to just BS your way through it? And then what? It's like you're out in the real world. It's okay. What skills do you offer? And it's sorry, we don't care that you studied this.
Yeah, like that's the thing. They're borrowing. Go ahead and borrow. If someone's willing to give you the money, go ahead. But I don't think that's the point. I think we both have the issue with. If your parents want to pay for you to do this, go ahead. If a university, if a bank, or anyone else wants to loan you the money to do that, go ahead. But that expectation at the end, to expect other people to care about your ability to pass a getting dressed course, or the phallus, or philosophy of fish, or any of these things. You can take these, they could have value, but you shouldn't just say because you valued it, automatically you're owed a living wage, however you want to define that, once you graduate. Let's say you took just all these courses, that was your entire college, you took all these courses. Why would that be the same as somebody who can now actually engineer a part of something that's actually going to go to the moon on the rover? Like, what? You can't say those are the same things. It's not.
No. All right, so then just two little sections, and the first one is going to be how even the illusion of grade inflation could screw over students. The evidence for grade inflation, as we're saying, it's kind of debatable, but a lot of journalists and students believe it. They say that this is having an impact because if a company believes that today's B is yesterday's C, they're going to be skeptical. Now, this puts pressure on students to earn higher grades or do other things to stand out. So it also gets students to put pressure on their professors to grade them better. Like, you hear those stories of like parents calling teachers and saying, give my kid better grades. So there's that issue as well. And then it also gets into things we've talked about like professors trying to sleep with their students, trying to sleep with their professors, or professors saying, hey, I'll give you a good grade if you do this. So of course that raises other ethical concerns. And again, this is one of those things, there's not a ton of rigorous work either. It's more speculation, but it's at least something to think about. And then just a few points to wrap up here. So the problem is that grades are supposed to be like one kind of language, but in reality, it's more like they're speaking a few different languages with a few different dialects. So one solution is colleges could give more in-depth reviews and feedback of students, but of course that'd be costly or time consuming. And a lot of the research-driven professors wouldn't want to do it. They'd rather just focus on research. And to many, it's not worth their time and energy to do this. And also colleges should do more to combat the idea of grade inflation because this is hurting students. So that's all I have. That's the end of the chapter. Any final thoughts or ideas?
Yeah, I mean, and that doesn't make sense. That I can see that being something very stressful for kids and for students and both for the teachers themselves. It just raises certain dilemmas where you get in a situation, and what does it select for? Does it select for somebody who knows how to game the system enough, who knows? Could there be a part of it where you say, okay, that just shows that people should understand it's not just one thing. So you get in New York, okay, you have a job and you might be really good at this one other thing, but you realize you need this other thing to add to it. So you can pad your grades by doing this one other thing on this other side. And you go to the experience of knowing that happens. So now when you're voting for a politician, you realize, okay, that politician really sucks at that one thing, but there's this one thing where they talk to me in such a good way, or they produce this one other topic that might not be as important. This might be the wine tasting course, because unless you're like a sommelier or something like that, it's not that big of a thing. Or like it might be like cyber porn in society. No, I don't know. This whatever. Some of these things I mentioned were okay. The joy of garbage, whatever. So somebody might be okay. We're not that good at physics, but as long as we're good at this other thing, if you put us together, if you say we're 100%, we're scoring 100 on this and a 60 in this, I'll focus on that 100 in this one thing. But that 100 is not the same in value and effect in the actual world and the practical nature of what that person is going to do. And that's something you see often in politicians. This person looks cool. This person is somebody nice. I just recently saw somebody I know post this. about the recent thing with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and playing some popular game right now, Stranger Among Us or something, with Ilhan Omar or something. And they're like, oh, somebody posted and said, this is something that AOC is achieving that other politicians haven't done, is seeming like a person. And I'm like, okay, well, I already thought of politicians as people, which is why I'm really anti the state, because I understand people, given those kind of tools, will in general be tempted to do very negative things.
Yeah.
So the initial assumption where this person thinks politicians aren't people, or they think other people don't think they're people, is problematic to me, is raising questions. Second, why do they think them being like people is somehow something that is uniquely positive, or that is something that she's only done and other people haven't been able to see that from other people? To me, I mentioned this, I think we mentioned this in the previous conversation or sometime before, where when I was looking at Bush, I said, okay, I don't really agree with him politically. At that time, I wasn't that politically involved. I was more to the left, if you'd say anything. So I was reading the media stuff. I was like, look, I understand why he's in there, because the average person, who's average Bush supporter, is like, man, he just looked like somebody I can just go down and sit in a bar with and have a beer with. That's why I like him. Like, that's not why you should vote for someone.
Yeah.
Then when it came to Obama and I was getting more into politics, people were like, he just seems like such a nice guy, like somebody you just want to hang out with. And I'm like, yeah, that's still not the reason you want to vote for somebody. And then now with the Trump versus Biden thing, they're saying, oh, look, Trump is so angry, he's so ornery, he does all these things, and Biden just seems so nice. I'm like, no, why are people even bringing this up? Why is that something that you're deciding? Why are you using that to rate politicians, to grade politicians, and give them that passing grade by giving them your vote? Yeah. And I think that could be in part due to these systems that we've been through, where we have these arbitrary systems of who's valued in what way that is not really based on anything practical. And you have these people coming through that system, and the society that comes out of that also continues that practice. And that is part of the negative aspect that I see going on in the world. And that, I think, is why these are important topics to talk about. This is why it's good to have these conversations.
And I try to separate the person from the skills too. Like, there was a chef who I worked for who was the worst boss I've ever had. I mean, this was a while ago now, but like, he's one of those that, like, I compare people I worked for before and after, and like, they're all better than him. But as far as cooking, he was very talented, and I give credit where credit's due. I can say he's a very talented chef, and then one of my friends is like, oh, of course, he's awesome. I'm like, dude, you drank with him once. Like, you didn't work with him. And it's like, yeah, he seemed cool outside of work to me too. But it's like, you work in a stressful environment, it's a different story. And it's like, and again, maybe if I knew him strictly on a personal level outside of work, some people say when he went off on his own, he sort of mellowed out a bit. Maybe if I knew him under different circumstances, I'd have a more positive view. But again, notice I'm criticizing the personality. I don't deny he's very talented. And then I can say the same about other people too. Like, a lot of the chefs I've worked with, I didn't like personally, but if they're talented, I give credit where credit's due. But it's like, I worked for them to learn from them. I'm not there to make a best friend,
Yeah, and then at the end of the day, who's when you're approaching this thing, if you're working with them, you're going to have a different evaluation. Yeah. If you're hiring, you're going to have a different evaluation. Yeah. If you're actually just coming there as a customer, you're going to have a different evaluation, because at the end of the day, this person might score a 10 on actual food, but then their actual ability to actually create an environment where the people they're working with are comfortable and happy and working in a positive way, whereas the environment, the waiters and the people who are dealing with this person might be put in a different way, where that throws off the dynamics. So for some people, they like coming to a restaurant and having the whole restaurant experience with everyone else. So if their waiter is put off because the chef has just been chewing them out in the back, they could come and give a more negative interaction with the actual person eating the food. And at the end of the day, that person who's reviewing the restaurant would be like, that kind of put me off, that my waiter wasn't good. The food was good, but this was off. Whereas if somebody is not as good of a cook, but a little better, and then the environment is more happy, the chef maybe comes out and says, hey, what's up? Like, interacts with the people. Like, that could be something where that makes them think, okay, the food isn't that high. So now that applies in a restaurant environment. But if it comes down to a thing where it's, okay, this person is you're just delivering food, you're not in there, then you'd probably be selecting more for just the person who's actually simply being able to cook the better food. And again, this is why I'm saying there's objections with this one-size-fits-all industrial schooling, because some workplaces, if you just major in something, depending on the workplace, you come out from Culinary Institute of America, depending on the workplace, it might focus more on just your ability to make the dish versus your ability to actually interact with the people in the place that you're working with. That's going to change the whole like equation for the different things. So that's why I'm encouraging to find ways where people who are hiring are a lot more involved in educating or in teaching and apprenticing. I don't even know what word I would use there.
Apprenticing.
Apprenticing. Okay,
Yeah.
and apprenticing their actual people who are coming in. Find more ways for them to actually get involved. Even you said in the Culinary Institute of America,
Yeah.
where there's some relations with actual restaurants where they come in, and there's some better way we can do this. You can keep the schools that they are the way they are, but then let schools actually have more interactions and relations with maybe businesses that are based in those areas of the school, so they're involved. Like some of the classes, instead of just going to the classroom, is literally going to the office of the place that you might work directly out, so you can learn what this environment. There's just better ways to do these things. It's very frustrating that we're not doing some of them. Yeah.
Well, to sort of add on to that last experience too, I remember when I was looking to leave this place, I interviewed at this other place, and to be fair to the guy, I wasn't well prepared for the interview. But the guy says to me at one point, he's like, "Why would you want to quit working in your current job? My friend loves eating there." And it's like, is this guy trolling me? Or like it was one of these things where I had to sit there. I'm like, is this guy messing with my head? Because it's like those. I mean, there are places they say some of the best places to eat are some of the worst places to work in. The demands are so high, they treat you terribly. You don't make much money, but it's the experience of working there that'll carry you wherever. So it's like, I don't see how someone in the industry can't make that connection. I don't know if he just had a lapse in judgment. I don't know if he was messing with my head, or I just found that experience very strange. Like someone, like a chef who had been working in the industry for years would say that. I like, what is wrong with you?
I think it is just another example of just how we compartmentalize some of these things, and we just don't generalize it. Like, does he? Yeah, I don't know. That's an odd thing, because you said
he also
the industry. I understand if he was outside of the industry, that would be different, because it's like, oh, this janitor is actually quitting Harvard. You don't really put the connection that you think, oh, just because students like Harvard, everybody working there should.
No.
But if you actually, this person actually was was a manager at a different place.
Yeah, he was a chef at another like nice place. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe they are in a different situation where they've been in a position where at least they think everywhere they enjoyed working, everybody else enjoyed working there too. So I don't know. That's odd.
Well, that's like, I don't know if I think I mentioned in a previous discussion where like I got into arguments with people from my hometown where I would criticize the town and they'd be like, "What's wrong with you? This place is great." And I'm like, okay, first off, like are you that arrogant? You just think everyone had the same experience as you? It's like I can take places I've worked. I can say I enjoyed this place. However, not everyone did. These people quit. Here's why. I didn't like these places. Here's why. Other people enjoyed them. Here's why. I'm capable of doing that. But there are certain people, I don't know. I just think they can't step outside of that perspective of like, I like this or I don't like this. Why doesn't everyone else think the same? And I've been sort of struggling to like understand that mentality, but it's been a tough thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll see that. We mentioned the election is around the corner, so some of you might be listening to this. This might be the last video you listen to from the United States of America, because there are some of you out there who are like, if Trump wins, I'm going to leave. So by the time we post this, you might be already gone or be like in the process of moving. But I hope you continue to listen to us wherever you may be. But yeah, I don't know. So is there anything else?
That's all I have.
Okay. So that's it for me as well. I'm going to say goodbye and thank you all for listening. There shall be more in this series. Steven, stay on after you say bye. We can finish up.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.